Before other people hop on, Toby, I don't know.
Great, welcome everyone. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes for people to arrive. Okay, so we'll probably give it another 30 seconds here, and we'll get started. We've had over 200 registrations for the webinar, which is awesome. Many of them are not AI note takers, which is great. And I think we'll we'll start in a couple of minutes. No. What time are we? Great. So should we kick off? Thanks everyone for joining. This is I'm really pleased to have the pleasure of hosting this webinar today. We have some great panelists. This is a very hot topic at the moment. This is the week, everyone, where the Greenhouse Gas Protocol has published their consultation. It's been at least a couple of years in the making. And so we thought we would, we've been getting a lot of questions about it. It could have a potentially very far-reaching impact on clean energy markets globally. And so we wanted to make, do everything we can to kind of share information. I'm really pleased to have a great selection of panelists joining today. Actually, the 3 people who have served on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol's technical working group for Scope 2, which is the main topic of today. We're talking about the Scope 2 revision process. So everyone will introduce themselves in their sections. We're going to start off with some presentations covering the introduction to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the corporate standard. That's going to be Jessica. Neil is going to talk us through what has been the process so far to develop a proposal for a revised Scope 2 guidance. And Abby is going to talk to us about some of the evidence base that's underpinning these proposals and the potential impact of what's been proposed on the energy system, where he's done a lot of modeling. And I'll let everyone introduce themselves rather than me doing that right now. But no, really, thank you so much for joining. Just a quick intro on our side for those not aware. So I'm Toby. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Granular Energy. So we're a tech company. We've been around for 4 years. We have a software tool that's used by many different energy companies and other players in the energy sector, helping them manage all of their green contracts and energy certificates. And really, it's all about providing more kind of traceable energy products for customers, which include some of this, advanced reporting. So, the way we work is to work with existing players in the energy sector. So a lot of utilities and energy suppliers gathering data from different energy certificate registries, from different systems, to then bring to essentially match and allocate. It's a giant allocation tool from generation to consumption, so that any customers of our people who buy energy from our customers can have kind of full traceability. So we're really helping take care of the kind of portfolio management of energy certificates and clean energy contracts, the allocations, and the end customer reporting. And the idea is to help optimize some of the existing processes around certificate management, and then enabling companies in the energy sector to build these kind of next generation green energy offers, including hourly matching. And we currently operate the world's largest hourly matching programs on behalf of the clients that we work with. And I guess the key message that we want to get across is that one of the things that's been proposed is hourly matching and deliverability when it comes to market base. And we really want to say that this is actually something that is it's very feasible. We're operating multiple terawatt hours of hourly matching today, working with many of the world's largest energy suppliers and utilities. So it's definitely something that we see as very feasible in many different countries around the world. But that's just our quick intro. I'm now really pleased to hand over to Jessica, who's gonna talk to us a little bit about what is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the history. Do you want to present from your slides, or do you want me to present, Jess?
You can go ahead. I think it'll be kind of clear when we're ready to flip slides.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Cohen here. I am the Director of Greenhouse Gas Accounting Policy and Climate Strategy at Constellation. For those of you who don't know, Constellation is the largest producer of clean energy in the US. We supply energy products, clean energy solutions, sustainability solutions, etc., to about 3/4 of Fortune 100 companies. I have been with Constellation since August of 2022, leading our greenhouse gas accounting and reporting process, decarbonization strategy, and then more recently, I've been a member of the Scope 2 Technical Working Group, so working on external advocacy on greenhouse gas accounting. Prior to that, I was a consultant at a few different places, preparing greenhouse gas inventories for corporate clients across many different sectors. So with that, I'll just dive right into why we're here, which is to talk about the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And first, I'll just go over a bit of background to get everyone oriented on the history here, which I think most of us are probably quite familiar with, but just in case we have some new converts to the world of greenhouse gas accounting. So it was first established in 1998, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, as a partnership between the World Resources Institute, or WRI, and then the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. And this was in response to the Kyoto Protocol, and the driving force behind it was really a need for a standardized framework to ensure consistent measurement and management of greenhouse gas emissions across corporates. Prior to that, organizations were kind of using different methodologies, which led to inconsistencies, lack of comparability, etc. And so the initial goal, again, was to develop an internationally accepted accounting and reporting standard And then with that, they kind of came out with the first corporate standard established in 2001, which is where we got the introduction to like scopes 1, 2, and 3, and that framework that we all uh, enjoy today. And so a key milestone, I'm not going to, dive into every update that kind of went on, but the first and the big one for us to talk about today was a 2015 Scope 2 guidance. And that update was crucial because we saw corporates starting to buy renewable energy, and it was becoming more prevalent, but there was not really a way to measure that in your inventory. So people were just kind of going and doing it how they saw fit. So the 2015 guidance, which did take about 5 years to develop, from what I understand. I wasn't as deep in the weeds on this stuff at the time, but it took a long time, and it was consensus driven. So about 5 years to kind of figure that whole thing out the first time. And so that's where we got the introduction of the dual reporting method that we all know and love. So both market-based and location-based reporting. Market-based meant to reflect your contractual relationships and choices or lack thereof to your energy supply, versus location-based, which is meant to reflect physical emissions on the grid on a kind of an average basis, so to allocate those physical emissions. But again, market-based is contractual or financial relationship to your energy supply and choice or lack thereof. So that revision was, again, in a direct response to these evolving market dynamics and stakeholder demand for more robust accounting. And I think we're kind of at another pivot point where we run into this again, where market dynamics are evolving post, 10 years after that 2015 period. And that's why we are now at the point of this update process that the Greenhouse Gas Protocol started to undertake officially in 2023, seeking public feedback on how the standard should be updated. And that's kind of where Neil, Abhi, and I got our start here in the Scope 2 Technical Working Group as part of that. So what exactly is the protocol? At its core, it's the most widely used set of greenhouse gas accounting standards, providing global, comprehensive, standardized framework for managing and measuring your emissions. Over 90% of Fortune 500 companies that report their emissions use the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standard. So it is kind of the main way anyone's accounting for their greenhouse gas emissions and disclosing. And then governments and other entities also use the protocol. There are kind of specific guidance documents for each of different type of entities that aren't just the corporate standard. So what's it do? It helps you understand your emissions footprint, identify reduction opportunities, track performance, report publicly, and inform policy and targets. We can go to the next one because I think we all want to get to the meat of this. So this one, again, is just a quick overview of the 3 scopes. Scope 1, direct emissions, typically broken down into 4 categories: stationary combustion, mobile combustion, process emissions, and fugitive emissions. So fugitive emissions, a big one that gets cited is methane from dairy farms. Stationary, just like a stationary generator. Mobile combustion, anything that moves on wheels and emits. And then fugitive are leaks, intentional or otherwise part of a process, so like venting emissions from natural gas storage. And then Scope 2 emissions, again, what we're all here to talk about, purchase electricity, steam, heating, and cooling for your own use. I think really what this boils down to is we kind of just all talk about it as electricity, so we can ignore the other ones for now. But it's really, again, that location-based and market-based methods. And then Scope 3, I won't spend tons of time here, but it's your upstream and downstream value chain emissions. So indirect emissions from basically what you're buying and what you're selling. The examples I kind of like to use on upstream are really things like IT equipment, so the life cycle emissions associated with your IT equipment, well-to-tank emissions from the fuel or energy you're using, and then downstream things like if you sell natural gas, if you're, have to transport your products to folks, that's all going to be in your downstream scope 3. Move on. Okay. Now getting right into the meat of the scope 2 stuff, and before I hand it over to Neil, greenhouse gas protocol, like as they in 2023, as they went to start this update process, they also decided to take a deeper look at their governance model and kind of bring it up to the day and age where they're now being referenced in different regulatory bodies. And so as part of that, they wanted to establish like a very clean and concrete governance model that you see here on the right of the slide. So you see the co-hosts of WRI and WBCSD up at the top. The steering committee provides, oversight for the whole process and sets strategy and direction, and will ultimately be responsible for ratifying the final guidance. The Independent Standards Board and Secretariat kind of report up to the steering committee, with the Secretariat primarily interacting with the Independent Standards Board, who provides technical guidance and rigor to the updates. And then down at the bottom, you see the technical working groups, which is where Neil, Avi, and I live. We're part of the Scope 2 technical working group. There are several others ongoing at the same time, including the Corporate Standard Technical Working Group, Scope 3, and the Actions and Market Instruments Technical Working Group. But we kind of, in collaboration with the Secretariat, have been tasked with developing technical guidance and recommendations, which the Secretariat then kind of bundles up into a consolidated draft that Neil will speak a little bit more to, and the ISB has approved what came out here just a few days ago for the public consult. And then before we leave this slide, I just want to touch on the decision-making criteria, which is the 1, 2, 3 you see on the left: integrity, impact, and feasibility. There is a detailed documents on the standard development process that dive deeper into the different decision-making criteria and how we've been tasked with thinking about updating the standard. But again, its integrity is reliant on like science and principles. So is the methodology grounded in research and scientifically backed? Impact, does it support ambitious climate action and programs? And then feasibility to implement, like, can people actually do this? There's a more expanded list that you can go take a look at, but that's really how we've been asked to think about this, is with these principles in mind, to provide a more robust update for Scope 2. With that, I will pass it over to Neil.
You want to present your slides, Neil? You're on mute.
Okay, and we'll do that again. Okay. There we go. So thank you, Toby and Jessica. My name is Neil Fisher. I'm a partner at the Northbridge Group, an economic and strategy consulting firm based outside of Boston. I've worked for over 35 years on behalf of electric utilities in both restructured and regulated markets, as well as competitive wholesale and retail suppliers. I've worked on industry restructuring, retail access implementation, wholesale and retail market design, supply procurement, and utility default service design. The first 30 years of my career was spent helping clients balance supply and demand from a physical reliability and/or a financial hedging perspective, not an environmental perspective. 6 years ago, I was engaged as an advisor to the Clean Air Task Force, and I saw the light, where I was introduced to greenhouse gas accounting for the first time. And I really became obsessed with how different it was from my day job and all the actions that I thought were needed to decarbonize electric grids. I co-authored several long papers outlining recommendations to develop a broader Scope 2 related report, including both more granular inventory metrics and new separate consequential metrics in a multi-statement carbon facts label. And I'm honored to be a member of the Scope 2 Technical Working Group, working alongside many smart people like Jessica and Avi, who've dedicated their careers to fighting climate change. And lastly, I want to make clear that we're speaking here today in our personal capacities only and not on behalf of the Technical Working Group as a whole. And we're not speaking on behalf of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol or its secretariat. They want us to say that, so I want to make that clear. At the outset, I think it's really important to recognize that the Technical Working Group members hold a range of views. There's no question that everyone participating in this process has good intentions, is interested in modernizing the greenhouse gas accounting rules. There's broad agreement that the status quo has problems. Since the protocol's inception, climate goals, the protocol's use, technologies have changed dramatically. And now looking at just what's on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol's blogs in June, September, and October, I pulled just some of the key concerns that were identified. First, the lack of accuracy and comparability of Scope 2 values. Companies can claim zero emissions based on purchases that are clearly not part of the grid system serving their consumption. They can match nighttime consumption with daytime attributes. Second, there's double counting risks where the same clean generation can be counted twice. Third, there's concerns about just the decision usefulness of the market-based method. And they mentioned too, the lack of price signals for times and places where renewables aren't readily abundant, and the lack of clear incentives for novel technologies. And they also mention, and I think it's important to note, that there's a gap between reported emissions and real-world climate impact. Inventory totals don't necessarily represent changes in atmospheric emissions. There's been a growing concern and growing recognition that companies that procure 100% renewable energy continue to consume electricity that's not carbon-free. We've all probably seen these kinds of articles in mainstream media and academic publications. The inaccuracy and misleading nature of environmental claims have caused significant damage to the credibility of the greenhouse gas reporting system and the actions of companies using them as justification. Now, I want to highlight what I consider to be the major problems with the status quo and do something a little bit unusual. I want to try and just highlight areas of agreement among experts in terms of decarbonization actions, procurement, and accounting. Experts generally agree that to decarbonize our global economies, we need to clean our electric grids, electrify as much as possible, transport, buildings, industry. We need to match deliverable clean supply with consumption, considering transmission and trading, while satisfying increasing demands for electricity. If you're a grid operator, a utility, or a competitive supplier, this should sound pretty familiar to you. Job one is to keep the lights on. Job two is to make affordable and stable rates. And we have a new job. We need to learn how to do this with clean energy. And this involves matching existing and new clean supply with existing and new demand. So it's not just new demand, not just new supply, it's all supply and all demand. Secondly, experts also agree we need a diverse mix of resources. We need to retain existing CFE as much as that CFE is carbon-free electricity as much as possible, and add incremental CFE. We got to move from 40% carbon-free electricity globally toward 100%. To do better matching, we need more wind and solar and demand-side management. To do matching really well, we need to develop storage, long-term storage, new forms of firm and flexible carbon-free electricity, and more transmission. Like in basketball, we need to assemble a winning team of complementary resources, point guards, forwards, and centers. What you need depends on what you have. We need to start developing new cost-effective technologies now, some of which may take decades to commercialize and deploy. Experts also agree that adding incremental CFE and extending the lives of existing CFE is needed to prioritize and reduce grid-level emissions to the atmosphere, which in row 3. Not all EACs or attributes, even if they're additional, have the same climate benefit. Not all actions have the same impact. And so we need to displace fossil generation as soon as possible, and we need to spend our climate dollars wisely and prioritize our actions. I think experts generally agree that the status quo greenhouse gas reporting system doesn't adequately measure any of these decarbonization actions particularly well. And in terms of procurement, I think there's broad agreement that the corporate goals, abilities, and access to markets differ. And not all companies have supplier choice. Some companies have large concentrated loads. Others are relatively small and dispersed over many regions. Not all companies have the scale and resources to enter into long-term power purchase agreements and de-risk projects and enable financing. Electricity markets vary, structures vary greatly. There's national and local climate policies vary. The starting points vary. Some companies operate on relatively clean grids, others largely served by fossil generation, and hundreds of millions of customers, and I don't always fully appreciate, still don't have any electricity globally. So a one-size-fits-all procurement strategy is not going to work. In terms of accounting, I think we need to recognize a wide range of climate actions: the great, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Accounting is intended to be policy neutral. Many experts also agree whether you are focused on row 1 here, the megawatt hour matching, or estimating grid level impacts in row 3, using more granular time and location data results in a more accurate fit-for-purpose calculation. Most experts also recognize that inventory and grid level calculations are fundamentally different and have different purposes and should not be conflated. Stakeholder feedback during the survey process indicated that both inventory and consequential were, and I'll quote here, viewed as essential. So in the public consultation row, in the public consultation now, we have specific recommendations related to the inventory accounting, sort of row 1 here, and we have separate questions related to consequential accounting dealing with rows 3 and 2. And regardless of a company's procurement strategy, whatever they choose, whatever their preferences are, whatever their market situation is, we need a reporting system to better measure progress towards all 3 of these decarbonization actions. They can be done together. You could do 1, you could do 3, you could do 1 and 2. There's various combinations here. I think that's really important to see. So what's being proposed at a high level? We're talking about a continuation of Scope 2, location-based and market-based dual reporting. They're both different ways to allocate the total emissions pie. I won't go into the details of those yet, but I also just want to say that in parallel, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is also seeking stakeholder feedback on consequential accounting methods to estimate whether the emissions pie is shrinking or increasing. So I think it's really, really important for us to remember that we're only kind of touching part of the elephant now. We don't yet know to what extent and how consequential metrics will be reported. This is going to be developed by the Action and Markets Instruments AMI Technical Working Group. So we all, including myself, need to be patient. In terms of the location-based market changes, there's updates to the emissions factor hierarchy, prioritizing emission factors using the most precise location information first, followed by the most precise time matching, and then consumption data that takes into account imports and exports. It requires the use of the most precise location-based emissions factor for which activity data is available, clarifies what accessible data means. There's hourly matching, which requires all contractual instruments be matched on an hourly basis using supply and load profiles when necessary, with certain cases for exemptions for smaller organizations. That applies to both voluntary procurement and standard supply. I want to also highlight that hourly matching does not apply to the residual mix reporting, which may be hourly, monthly, or remain annual. And there's new deliverability requirements that all contractual instruments used are sourced from generation deemed deliverable. And there's also a provision that could be national boundaries. It could be, balancing authorities within national boundaries. There's also provisions that allow deliverability may be evidenced from outside the market boundary in certain cases. There's standard supply service, where a reporter can claim their pro rata share of supply that's generation that's subject to regulated cost of recovery as part of default service for all customers, whether they're a monopoly supplier or government mandated clean energy procurement programs where attributes are retired or made ineligible. I'm not going to go into all the pieces of this, but there's that. And there's also updates to the definition of the residual mix. And if you don't have match it with attributes and you don't have residual mix, you're supposed to use only fossil emissions rates there. And there's a number of implementation measures for feasibility that what I don't see here on the list, but it's important, is access to hourly EACs. You can use supply data, and supply profiles could be applied to monthly EACs or even annual EACs. So you can use supply profiles, there's load profiles, there's exemption thresholds for size per region or by the entity. There's questions about legacy clause, so that we don't penalize anybody who had contracts under the old rules. And there's also phased implementation rules that are being considered, that there could be multiple years after the new rules go in effect that would give people time to comply with the new standard. Lastly, I just want to just highlight, we're right now, a lot's already happened. This is a long process. We're at a really important stage. And I encourage, we're in the public comment period has just began. We have open consultation ends December 19th of this year. I think there's 235 questions on the survey. There's two parts, a separate dealing with location-based, market-based, and the separate part on consequential. And the current plan is to finalize and publish updated standards by the end of 2027. And I just want to highlight that I think this is important, that the location-based and market-based method requirements are scheduled to take effect on a coordinated schedule with AMI's complementary consequential metrics, and along with other updates across the corporate suite. And the last thing I'm going to point out here is that there are different topics were covered in phase one, which is what the open consultation is about, and then phase two. And we're going to go back and revisit some of the decisions that have been made based on some of the feedback that we hear from the public consultation, and we're going to be starting to work on these phase two topics. And I will stop there and pass it off to Abhi.
Thanks, Neil. And just quickly jumping in to say we want to make sure we have time for questions. So Abby, I think we're a little bit behind, so we'll need to go quickly. And please do drop in questions into the chat. So we want to make sure there's lots of time for discussion afterwards. Thanks.
Thanks, Toby and Neil, Jessica. Let me share my screen. Not really known for speaking fast, but I'm going to do my best. Is that showing up okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Right. So yeah, Jessica and Neil gave an excellent overview of the history of the GHG protocol process and where we're at now. So there have been a lot of kind of robust debates and several proposals from the discussions in the technical working groups. Now, our goal at Transition Zero was to put some numbers behind this. So to introduce myself, I'm Abhishek Shivakumar, Head of Systems Modeling at Transition Zero, where we develop open modeling tools and lower the barrier to entry to energy systems modeling. So when you're looking at this question of assessing the impacts of current proposals and putting some numbers behind the current proposals, we wanted to make sure that there was applicability of these proposals in markets across the globe. Traditionally, these discussions have been weighted more towards Europe and the US. And secondly, we found that a lot of these questions require detailed power systems modeling in order to consider these questions of high spatial and temporal resolutions as these proposals relate to making those aspects of the accounting framework more strict. So today I'd like to cover a few of these metrics that we aim to draw out in our modeling work. So we wanted to look at what supporting evidence we could find for the different proposals on the cost of clean energy procurement, system costs, the role of interconnectors, cost of electricity generation, and providing a market signal to more novel technologies and technological choices. So first, we looked at the case of India. So overall, we've modeled 5 markets in Asia. So Japan, India, Taiwan, Singapore, and Malaysia. So in the case of India, this figure here shows the modeling results from the India South grid. So we compared the cost premium of achieving the current regime of annual matching versus different levels of hourly matching, from 70% hourly matched clean energy all the way to 100%. And we were able to quantify what the cost premium would be on top of the existing tariffs in order to achieve these different scores. What you can see is the 100% hourly matching would be twice the cost premium of the existing annual matched electricity. But what this doesn't take into account is that the existing rate of industrial tariffs in India is about 6 to 9 rupees. And once you take that into account, in fact, the 100% hourly matched energy provides a more stable long-term electricity tariff against this more volatile industrial tariff. Moving on to the example of Malaysia, where we compared several different cases. So we compared annual matching versus different levels of CFE, so hourly matched clean energy from 70 to 100%. And we also did this across 3 different technological palettes, where we only considered existing technologies meeting your target, or more novel technologies like long duration energy storage being included as well. And finally, including the most nascent technologies like gas, hydrogen, and gas CCS being able to contribute towards the clean energy goal. And what we can see is that the system costs and benefits will vary significantly depending on which regime is chosen. And what was interesting is that we found up to a level of 80% of hourly matched electricity, the system cost will in fact be lower than the current annual matching regime. Moving on to the case of Singapore, where due to land constraints, Singapore is likely to be quite reliant on its neighbors for electricity imports. So we found the role of interconnectors in the case of Singapore would be key to achieving its carbon-free energy targets. Excuse me. And this is especially relevant in the context of the ASEAN power grid that's being discussed. And an MOU has recently been signed, and this is likely to drive this discussion around interconnectors and hourly matching. Moving on to the case of Taiwan, we compared the PPA unit cost versus the average electricity tariff and cost of generation, and found that it was lower for most cases of CFE versus historical tariffs. And finally, looking at the case of Japan, we found some interesting trends. We found that the choice of which accounting regime is made could provide a market signal for the development of novel technologies such as long duration energy storage. So all the way on the right, you can see that CFE 100 is much more achievable when long duration energy storage, and even more so when gas CCS is taken into account. Yeah, over to you, Toby.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Abby. Cool. So yeah, we're starting to get some questions through in the Q&A. There is actually, there's a chat and a Q&A. So I'll try to, maybe if you could try and put the questions in the Q&A section, I'll jump that out. But we had one, so let's dive right in. One question that's come up, I've had quite a few questions about it from people. Maybe, I don't know, Jessica, if you want to take this on the standard supply service. So Karine has asked a question about that. The changes for, so the guidance doesn't provide many details on the standard supply service part. Trying to understand some of the specific consequences for individual local markets. In Karine's case, it's the German market. So maybe could you point her to some more info or provide some explanation about how to understand that?
I can get things rolling and then pass it to Neil too if I miss anything. So the standard supply service, the intent of that is to really allow companies to account for clean energy that they have pre-existing financial relationships to via mandatory or non-bypassable charges. So they have an existing contractual relationship to that clean energy that's directly traceable between them and the clean energy. So a really simple and clear-cut example of this is renewable portfolio standards in the US, right, where Constellation is a load-serving entity. We go out and we retire RECs on behalf of the load that we serve based on the load that we're serving, and that the cost of those RECs that we procure in a compliance market is passed through in the rates to customers. So they are paying for that clean energy and therefore should be able to claim it. Right. And basically, as we work through this, like throughout the world, there are a lot of situations where customers are paying via their rates, or if it's like in the same bound, if their energy supply is coming from the same boundary of where they're taxed, potentially in that way, they are paying for clean energy already. So another example is vertically integrated markets, where rate-based clean generation, like rate-based nuclear, is part of what they're already paying for, and therefore they should be able to claim it on the front end of their greenhouse gas accounting and the Scope 2 market-based inventory. In Germany, my understanding of the geos that go to meet kind of compliance obligations, or the renewables that go to meet compliance obligations, is that or subsidies, whatever it is that they don't qualify for issuing GOs, and therefore they're not available in the voluntary market. So the way the standard supply service definition works, and unfortunately I don't have more links to anything from the protocol, but the way we theorize it is that if the EAC is part of the tax policy, like if the tax policy or the compliance regulatory policy makes ineligible issuance of an EAC and or retires the EAC, then it would be part of standard supply service. But if the EAC is not part of the issuance, or sorry, if the EAC is not part of the policy, then it's not standard supply service. So there are like 45Y tax credits in the US. Sorry, I'm more familiar with the US, but 45Y technology neutral new clean energy production tax credits that don't act on the EAC at all. And in that case, that would not be standard supply service. But if the policy or the framework does act on the EAC, then it would be. Again, apologies, I don't have more detail than what they've already published.
Yeah, I mean, the intent is to really deal with situations where it's pretty clear that the CFE is required, and that you don't have a choice. It shows up in your bill, or and there's a meaningful financial relationship between the customer and the energy, and also so it's those both. It's passive. It's something you get whether you like it or not. Just because there's a subsidy doesn't necessarily mean that it's standard supply service. And there are definitely clear cases where you got a monopoly supplier. It's in rate base. You have to pay for it. And there's certain things it's not going to. We've talked about exempting certain things, like if there are competitive solicitations, even if it's government owned and they're not getting funded to participate in those competitive solicitations, or things can get partially recovered in taxpayer money, but it's not, not fully recovered, and they're not attributes that are being retired or ineligible as a result of those subsidies, would not be a part of standard supply service. So clearly there's more work to do to spell out all the different, specific cases. All this stuff, by the way, is being treated somehow today, right? And, a lot of the standards, what's in standard supply service, is somehow, it can be used in voluntary procurement. We're trying to align voluntary procurement with sort of compliance required CFEs, so that voluntary procurement is on top of or in addition to what's already being required. And also to clarify that if you're already paying for something because it's required, you should be able to claim it. And so CFE is, alt CFE is treated equally what you're paying for.
Okay, thank you. All right, lots of questions, trying to kind of piece them together. There's been a few questions on, I guess, the topic of deliverability and location. So Sarah asks, what's the panel's view on how location should be defined in the greenhouse gas protocol? Is it state lines? Is there interconnectors? And so relatedly, I think that was Karina again saying that there's some location criteria defined for location-based reporting and location criteria defined for market-based reporting, and they're not exactly aligned in the proposal and the consultation. So maybe if you wanna, who wants to take that question? Maybe Neil, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the consultation, they're sort of there's definitely in certain parts of the world there's clear decisions that are being proposed, where we're using bidding zones in Europe. The US, it's still sort of there's several options there that are being considered, and there have been differences as to how granular to go, how much to consider transmission, and there's definitely trade-offs. There's no on one hand, we want the zones to reflect deliverability, but we don't want to make them so narrow that you can't aggregate and load efficiently and supply. So there is some, I think that's one of the things that we didn't come out with definitive delivery zones for the US. And so you'll see in there that there are a number of options, and we're seeking input on those.
Great. Maybe a quick question for Abby. So George has asked specifically, kind of relating to your question, what's the rationale for sort of analyzing hourly matching at a system level as opposed to on a supplier level? Would an annual matching be enough for the system level? So just kind of, maybe a part of that is just how you were doing the modeling, because it was system modeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just typing out a detailed response to George as well, so I can just read that out and or maybe just press enter at the end of it. So essentially, the rationale is to more closely align procured generation with the actual demand of the participating consumer, so that the system operator is not left with these hours of excess generation and others with deficits, where there's a mismatch with consumer demand. Specifically in the modeling, the way we looked at this was we assumed that if a load was in a specific grid region, that load could either be served directly by generation with which they've signed a PPA, or import from the local grid. And essentially, this mix would determine the cleanness of their portfolio. What we found is that in the hourly matched case, the participating consumer was able to offset some of the non-zero marginal cost on the system, and therefore reduce the emissions and costs, which is how we've seen this benefit at 70 and 80% CFE. With higher rates of CFE, you have higher emission reduction, but the cost then does become higher as well, because you need quite a bit of overbuild to meet those hourly matching levels.
Great, thanks, Abby. Maybe I'll address this to Jessica, but there's been a couple of questions. So Andrea is asking, what are the implications for companies who have set net zero targets? So many companies have set net zero targets based on the current Scope 2 guidance. And so will this make those targets less achievable? And if so, what could the implications be for the credibility of kind of net zero? What are the implications? And maybe kind of tying into that, Raphael has a question around temporal consistency. I'm not sure I fully exactly understand the question around that. It seems to be about rebaselining, the new versus the old standard, and applying fossil factors if residual factors are not applicable. So it's kind of like, what is the switching from one to the other in terms of methodologies?
Yeah. Okay. I will start with Andrea's question. So I personally, again, this is my personal view, Greenhouse Gas Protocol does not opine on target setting. That's not kind of their purview. They are focused on the accounting in particular. My personal view on this is that interim targets within the next 5 years or so should likely not be subject to the revisions, and especially if we do a multi-year phased implementation plan, it would not be enough time for that. But longer term targets, I believe should kind of align to the new standard and be set around the new standard, because it would be a more accurate reflection of value chain or inventory emissions. So if you are setting an inventory emissions, absolute reduction target, then it should align to the most rigorous set of standards that we have for accurate greenhouse gas accounting. That said, I think it's a good question, and something that, again, I have personal views on and have grappled with a fair bit, but we have not kind of tackled as of yet in the technical working group, nor do I think we will do so in a comprehensive and detailed manner, as that is not the purview of the protocol, and would kind of be deferential to the other organizations that manage target validation, target setting, et cetera. So yeah, will it make them less achievable? I hope not in the long term, but credibility of net zero, I think, would increase with more rigorous accounting and more accurate greenhouse gas accounting. For Raphael's question, I did type a response in the Q&A chat, but we haven't grappled in depth with rebaselining, though. Again, I have personally, because I'm responsible for doing this sort of thing for Constellation. I think with the multi-year phased implementation plan, we will have multiple years, or at least one, during which the revised standard is finalized and published, and we are also still using the current standard. And at that point, companies could begin to kind of calculate in both ways as a transition out and part of rebaselining. So I think there's going to be ample time to kind of grapple with and decide the standardized kind of correct way to approach rebaselining when you are switching methods like this. And I'm certain we'll start to work through that. To your second question about applying fossil factors if residual factors not applicable or not available, then your reduction will be overestimated when switching to renewable instruments. That's a good point. I think for the sake of Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the general approach to greenhouse gas accounting, which is in the absence of better information or precise information, take a more conservative approach. This is a buffer, kind of a situation where you're trying to thread the needle between grid mix average and fossil emission factors if you don't have residual mix factors, which would fall somewhere in the middle. The problem with using grid mix average factors in this case is that you are then taking credit for the clean energy of other people who have procured those EACs. That's going into the grid mix average factor. So as a result, you're kind of double counting those EACs, even though it's unintentional. And so again, from the perspective of conservative approach and not double counting, this is the solution we came up with if there's no residual mix emission factor to ensure that you kind of avoid double counting or claim corporate claim of clean energy.
Great. Thanks. We won't have time to answer all the questions, I'm afraid, because we're at time. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining. There were lots of questions around hourly matching, which is one of our favorite topics. So we'll have to come back to that, hopefully with a follow-up webinar. Yeah, we do, send us. We'll try to answer a few more of those questions when we send around the recording, and do feel free to reach out to us at Granular Energy or anyone else from the panel if you'd like to learn more and have further questions. But yeah, thank you so much to the panelists for joining. Thanks, Eleanor, for helping to organize the event, and yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. And have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Toby. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.